are down.
There's concern about hundreds of people who chose to not evacuate and may be trapped on Ocracoke Island.
There are rescue teams ready as soon as they can get in.
Emergency officials here in North Carolina warn the biggest issue is going to be flash flooding. Storm surges are expected up to 7 feet. The storm's violent winds were on display at this light station off the coast of North Carolina. From space, Dorian still seems menacing. More than 350,000 homes and businesses have lost power. Dorian sideswiped the southeast coast, spawning at least 24 tornadoes. This waterspout became a tornado that tore through an RV park.
2 minutes down from my house, there was 2 tornadoes that had touched down. And I've never been in one. I don't want to be in one.
Dorian also caused widespread flooding in coastal communities around Charleston and Wilmington.
When you've been displaced during a storm like this 2 years in a row, it's tough. It's tough on the family.
Dorian is expected to continue skirting the eastern seaboard throughout the weekend. Storm surge, hurricane, and tropical storm warnings and watches have been issued as far north as Canada. On the Jersey Shore, hurricane flags are up and the beaches are deserted. Katherine Johnson, CBS News, Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina.
CBS News weather producer David Parkinson joins us now with the latest on the storm.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. We're watching the updates to the storm as it really starts to pull away. This is the center of the storm. It is actually starting to get lost by radar. That's how far offshore it is. But interestingly enough, you can see the precipitation shield extends not just from Virginia and North Carolina, but straight up through the Delaware beaches. So Bethany and Dewey down to Ocean City, Chincoteague and Assateague in Maryland and down to Virginia. And then you can actually see some of the rain actually making its way onto the South Shore of Long Island. So Gilgo up to Fire Island, and then back over towards Riverhead there. And you can also see some rain in parts of Monmouth County in New Jersey. All of this will continue to sort of pinwheel around the storm. So you've got a wet day, but not anything horrendous for the Northeast. But it's a serious, more serious situation further down, closer to the center of the storm, which is now 110 miles to the northeast of Cape Hatteras. It's moving in the northeast at 17 miles an hour, so it is a lot faster, and it remains a Category 1, which is probably what it will be all the way up through to maritime Canada. But I do want to point out that we do have some flash flood watches and warnings. The flash flood warning includes parts of Virginia Beach up to Norfolk. That's until 5:15, and the watch goes to 8 p.m. That extends a little bit further inland just because the rain comes down so heavily with this storm, so close to the center of the storm. So that's a major concern that we have for the next couple of hours, at least with Dorian. Here is the track of Dorian. You can see it's well east of the Cape and the islands, so no major impacts to Nantucket, the Vineyard, and the Cape as well, but the winds will be strong. Here's the thing for those of you in the Northeast. You're going to have rain pretty much from now off and on until about 6 a.m. tomorrow, and then things will clear from west to east. It'll probably be done with the Cape at about noon. In the meantime, though, the winds will gust into the 30s and 40s, so there's potential for some projectiles and things like that. Secure some lawn furniture. That would just be my suggestion if you're along the coast. Storm surge is one more threat that we have, and that is this afternoon. We've got a high tide cycle around 2, and so within an hour or two of that, you have the potential for a 2 to 4 foot storm surge into some of the back bays here along the Outer Banks and the eastern shore of North Carolina. In particular, what's happening is all of this water is getting pushed this way because you're now on the backside of the storm, and you have the potential to see some really dangerous storm surge. We've already seen that in the Ocracoke area earlier today. One last thing to mention, take a look at the active tropics. I mean, there is a lot of stuff going on out there. So we've got Dorian here. Got an area to watch here. This one potentially could make it a little bit closer towards the Gulf of Mexico, maybe into next week, but there's only about a 10% chance for that right now. This storm we're not too worried about because once the storm passes your latitude, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to move off to the north. And then this is the one to watch. This is called Invest 94L. We have some decent mild consensus that tracks it over towards the Antilles. Where it goes from there, whether it goes up sort of along the east coast, whether it goes into the Gulf or whether it dies, that's still TBD, but that's the one to watch. That's in the 10 to 15 day range, so we've got a while for that to come there, but I will rest assured be resting next week to bring you the latest on that one as it gets closer, but it's a long way from the end of hurricane season. September 10th is the heat, the statistical peak of your hurricane season, and then we still got another couple months after that.
David Parkinson, thanks so much, David.
Sure thing.
At least 30 people are dead in the Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. The Category 5 storm tore through the Bahamas last Sunday, packing maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. That meant roofs were torn apart, they were torn off, leaving debris all along its path. And for more than 2 days, Josh Morgerman, a popular storm chaser, was actually reported missing after heading to the Abacos Islands in preparation for the storm. He later signaled that everything was okay. Morgerman is the subject of the Science Channel's new show, Hurricane Man, which spotlights how people from all different walks of life feel the effects of our planet's most ferocious hurricanes. Well, Josh Morgerman joins us now to share his experience during Hurricane Dorian. Josh, thank you very much for joining us. First off, I'm glad to hear that you were okay. But you and I were talking before the start of this interview. You said this was one of the worst hurricanes that you've ever been in. Why was it so bad?
You know, maximum sustained winds of 185 miles an hour with gusts well over 200. That's a rare bird. I mean, this was not just a Category 5. This was way into Category 5. You don't get hurricanes like that often. And for one of them to make a direct hit on a populated area, that is extremely unusual.
So walk me through what it was like to really be there in the middle of all of this.
Well, the hurricane approached and we had several hours of wind and rain, and then as the inner core, the inner ring of violent winds hit the town, Marsh Harbor, just everything went crazy. Basically, everything just turned white. You couldn't see anything. I was in a concrete building. The walls were shaking. Nonstop crashing sounds as flying debris was hitting the building. The boards blew off the windows, and 5 other guys now were holding furniture against the shutters to keep them from blowing in, because if they did, that room where 10 people were sheltering would have become a shooting gallery of flying debris. I mean, it was a close call. By the time we got to the comm center, the eye, I mean, we barely made it. And we came outside during the eye, cars thrown all over the place, some of them mangled like they'd been through a blender, okay, just from the wind. The storm was only halfway over. We had to find another building to ride out the second half.
It's so scary to hear you say this. You know, people are meant to evacuate in a situation like this. You go right into it. What kind of precautions do you take when you go in?
Well, with a hurricane like this, when you're dealing with this level of hurricane, it's like, this is like you go from conventional warfare to nukes. This is like a special thing. You handle it with care. So a hurricane like this, I play it safer, meaning I don't just, ride it out anywhere. I ride it out in a concrete building. And actually, I thought I was being very conservative and playing it safe by riding this out in a big concrete school with many other people. Even that building wasn't safe because of those 185-mile-an-hour winds. That's how strong this hurricane was, that it really just, the conventionally safe places weren't safe.
We're getting word from our troops on the ground that, people just don't even realize the extent of the devastation from this right now. What did you see when you walked out?
I'm glad that we're talking about this because the world needs to know. The devastation, you can't get words to describe it. The whole area, the areas above the water level were just flattened by just these incredible winds. But large parts of Marsh Harbor, this town, are very low lying, and a tremendous storm surge, meaning the ocean coming up onto land, which happens during hurricanes, that just swept a whole area of the city clean, and they still haven't found all the bodies. I mean, this was like really serious stuff, and it's not just the severity of the damage, but the extent of it is every direction. It's like tornado damage, but it's for miles and miles and miles in every direction. Help is needed.
So do you think that the Bahamas, were they prepared for this type of hurricane?
Well, I think to some degree, yes, because the Bahamas, one of the things that they really excel at is construction. So Bahamian houses and buildings, they know how to build for hurricanes. And I've seen this in the past. When strong hurricanes hit the Bahamas, very little damage to houses and buildings. Now, this one was so strong that actually there was a lot of damage, but it was just because of how unusual it was. So in that sense, I think they were pretty good. In other areas, maybe not so good. That low-lying part of the city that I was talking about that got swept by that storm surge, they did advise people in that area to evacuate, but because of either communication issues or, people not understanding the threat, a lot of people stayed, and those are the ones who died.
You went silent for a while on Twitter, and people were genuinely concerned that something had happened to you. Shortly after you returned to Twitter and you sent out this tweet, medical clinic overwhelmed, an absolute catastrophe, send help to Abaco Islands. How bad of a humanitarian crisis do you think this is now at this point?
It's mammoth, There were so many people. Basically, the government, it's called the Bahamas Government Complex. It's the biggest, strongest building in the town. That became sort of like this hub of human activity. Everyone who lost their home was basically living in and around this property. It didn't seem like a lot of people. There were a lot of people in charge, so folks were kind of left on their own. There weren't food supplies at that point, and the plumbing wasn't working well. It was a real, I would call it a humanitarian crisis. I mean, people were having very good spirits about it, but it was a tough situation. Now, the medical clinic next door, like I said, was overwhelmed. And those doctors and nurses, man, heroic, working around the clock to help people. But, they had more than they can handle with their resources and with their staff.
You've chased storms, like I said, for 28 years. What do you think the takeaway is from this particular hurricane that hit the Bahamas?
That's a great question. I think that education about storm surge, which is the ocean coming up onto land, needs to continue. Now, I was in the other storm that ties this one for me was Super Typhoon Haiyan. A typhoon and a hurricane are the same thing. It's just what they call it in East Asia. Super Typhoon Haiyan, which flattened a city in the Philippines. Thousands died in that one, again, because of storm surge. And what we found afterward was that the people in the threatened area didn't understand what storm surge is and that they need to get onto higher ground. And I think that's what happened here in the Bahamas. Wow. It's all about education. If people could be educated, if they could understand this threat, we won't have these kinds of casualties.
Josh Morgerman, so grateful you could join us, Josh.
My pleasure.
And be sure to tune in to The Hurricane Man. It premieres on the Science Channel September 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern. Well, the U.S. added 130,000 jobs last month. That's according to the latest report from the Labor Department. The total is less than the 160,000 jobs that Wall Street analysts reportedly had expected the economy to add back in August. Well, the unemployment rate remained at 3.7. That's close to a 50-year low. And the report also showed average hourly earnings rose 0.4% last month. And despite the missed projections, President Trump still says the economy is doing well. This morning he tweeted targeted patriot farmers getting massive dollars from the incoming tariffs. He also criticized the Federal Reserve and China and insisted the talks are happening. Joining me now from Washington, Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. So, Bob, this jobs report suggests that hiring remained relatively steady, but there are concerns that trade war sort of dragging this figure down. How concerned should the president be?
I think it should be somewhat concerned. I mean, if you listen to Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he has been saying that the economy is strong, but there are some areas of concern. Of course, it's basically the trade war with China that has been really making the market like a roller coaster. So overall, the president knows he can't lose this economy or he's going to lose the election. He's got to have the economy very strong, and despite the economy doing well, certainly over the last couple of years, his numbers are not that great. So that's why he is constantly lobbying Jay Powell on interest rates, and I think you're going to see that going into 2020. So, overall, I think that you look at some stats, it doesn't look so great, but overall, the economy is doing well. But will it continue, especially because I don't see any type of trade deal with China happening anytime soon.
So we also know, in addition to watching all of this with China, which is going to remain to be a big story this fall, White House, we know Democrats, they're going to get back, and they want to launch an investigation into Vice President Pence to look into the president's golf resort in Ireland. The president claimed that it wasn't his idea for Pence to stay there. Do we have a sense what Democrats are hoping to learn from trying to push for this?
Well, they want to get more details. I mean, this was not a good week for the vice president. Initially, the vice president's office was saying this was a suggestion that was coming from the president, and then you had some backtracking on what the communication was. And of course, this is a juicy story for the media because you're talking about federal dollars. And was there favoritism to go to one of Trump's places? And I think that's what they want to get answers, because we had different type of answers coming from both the White House and the Vice President's office. And that's why there has been some tension. Yahoo News reporting that there's been some tension between the two camps this week.
And Bob, it's not just the resort in Ireland. We know the House Judiciary Committee says that they want to look into the president's promotion of his Miami resort as host for the next summer's G7 summit. They call this a violation of the Emoluments Clause, but we've seen previous legal challenges related to the president and to the emoluments. It really hasn't gone anywhere. So should the president be worried about this situation? Is it any different?
I think it's somewhat different because you're going to have other countries weighing in as we get closer to that summit. And I think Democrats here are just trying to apply some political pressure. So you keep this in the headlines and maybe Trump will back off and maybe he'll face international pressure that this isn't the best idea to have it there. But certainly the president has said that it's a great place. He loves his resorts and he thinks that it can accommodate it. He said it's very close to the airport, so it makes it convenient for foreign leaders. But let's wait to see what foreign leaders say about this. I don't think they're going to say anything anytime soon, but when we get closer to it, they may balk.
I want to also ask you about Congress returning on Monday. We know that Democrats are putting gun control front and center. There are reports that the president's pitching a gun proposal that few lawmakers really want. It would include a death penalty for mass shooters and putting more records in the background check database. How do you see this, Bob, playing out? Where does this gun debate go when Congress returns?
Rena, I think you're going to see two different approaches in the House and the Senate. On the House side, very aggressive. The House Judiciary Committee is going to be marking up, moving bills in committee. The assault weapon ban is getting very close to getting the votes to pass. It's at 209 right now. All they need is 218. So I think that could be a bill that passes on the House floor. In the Senate, it's a totally different story. Mitch McConnell is not getting ahead of this president. He said he's willing to move some type of bill, but he's got to be clear where the president is on this. And the president has not been clear. He said a lot of different things on background checks. So Mitch McConnell, who is also up for re-election next year, has said maybe we'll look at something, but the White House has to say where they want to be. Now, one of the things that Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham is working on is a bipartisan bill called Red Flag, basically red flag some people that should be red flagged, that shouldn't be able to get a gun. That is not supported by the NRA, and I don't think that's going to move because also Democrats say that's not enough. We've got to do more. So I just think you're going to see very different approaches by the House and Senate next week.
What else are you watching for, Bob, as Congress returns next week?
A couple things. You've got to fund the government by September 30th. And there was a big budget deal, but now they actually have to implement that budget deal into single appropriation bills. Okay, well, that's going to take some time. They don't have much time to do that before the end of September. So I think you're going to see a short-term funding bill. I don't think you're going to see a government shutdown. You have disagreements over the wall. That's one area. The other area to watch is trade, the new NAFTA. The Trump administration badly wants to get the USMCA through Congress. It has to be approved by Congress. Nancy Pelosi says that she's interested in getting on a path to yes, but some changes need to be made, labor, environmental. I think it's 50-50 of whether that passes. That's something to watch this fall. And lastly, Democrats have to make a decision over the next several months. Are they going to impeach this president or not? That's not going to go, I don't think, into 2020, not deep into 2020.
All right, Bob Cusack, always grateful to have you here joining us. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Renee.
And still to come, the 2020 Democrats that will be in New Hampshire this weekend to make their crucial pitch to voters. Our very own Caitlin Huey-Burns is there to break it all down. Plus, firefighters struggle to contain a wildfire in Southern California as it races toward hundreds of homes. Stick with us. You're streaming Cbsn. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz says that he will not run for president. Schultz had publicly considered running for the White House as an independent. The 66-year-old had planned to spend roughly $100 million on a campaign, but the billionaire says that he did not want to risk taking votes from a moderate Democratic nominee, like former Vice President Joe Biden. Schultz also cited back surgeries that he's had to have, saying that the recovery has made it difficult for him to travel. Cbsn political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Londonderry, New Hampshire. She's actually there to cover tomorrow's state Democratic convention. So, Caitlin, I want to ask you about Schultz. What exactly are we hearing about how he decided to make this determination, and what's next for him?
Well, remember almost immediately after Schultz said that he was thinking about waging an independent party bid, Democrats came out of the woodwork decrying his entry and saying that it would have taken away from Democrat support in 2020. They thought an independent bid from Schultz would really derail their chances of defeating Donald Trump. They're really up in arms about it. So he kind of reevaluated his status in the campaign. You cited that back surgery as well. He has not been active on the trail at all for the past several months. So this doesn't exactly come as a surprise. It does, though, come as an acknowledgement that waging an independent party bid is very difficult. You have to make the ballot in all of these states, which is no easy task. And you mentioned, though, all that money he planned on spending in this campaign. What does he use that for? He said he will donate that to political causes. So we'll kind of watch to see how, if and how he remains influential in this process.
We know you're there in New Hampshire for the Democratic Convention, which starts tomorrow. Why is this such a big event for the Democratic Party and for these presidential hopefuls?
Well, I know we've been focusing a lot on Iowa and South Carolina, but New Hampshire wants to say, look, we are in this too. They are the first state to hold a primary. This is a tradition that goes back 100 years. They take this role very seriously. Iowa has the first in the nation caucuses. New Hampshire has the first in the nation primary. So 19 candidates are coming to New Hampshire today and tomorrow to address that big state party convention. We're expecting several thousand New Hampshire voters, activists, local lawmakers. You're going to see all of these candidates try to court support here in New Hampshire. I will say this is a state that it's easy to get around. It's easy to campaign. Lots of candidates who are considered underdogs like to come here because they believe they can make that, person-to-person interaction. They believe retail politics here can really still win the day, even in a nationalized kind of campaign environment. So here, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren are topping the polls. We're here at a Kamala Harris event that is starting to get underway soon here. She has not been in the state a lot, and there are questions about how tough she is competing here. But Joe Biden is leading, Bernie Sanders in second, Elizabeth Warren in third in the polls, all trying to make their pitch.
And we know Joe Biden picked up endorsements from two former chairs of the New Hampshire Democratic Party today. How crucial is that for the convention, for the candidates, also for his support there?
Right, he is leading the polls here, and he wants to kind of make a pitch to more moderate voters in the state. About 40% of the electorate here are actually undeclared voters, so they can actually participate in the different primaries. Since there's not a competitive Republican primary, he's hoping that a lot of them can turn out for him in the Democratic primary here in New Hampshire. But Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders come from neighboring states, Massachusetts and Vermont, of course, and are making distinct pitches here. Elizabeth Warren has had the most visits of all of the candidates, and Bernie Sanders second. Sanders, of course, defeated Hillary Clinton in the primary in 2016 overwhelmingly. He's trying to build upon that support that he had then and grow it. Elizabeth Warren has been focused on the person-to-person interactions, coming to town halls, telling her personal stories. She has the advantage of just being across the border and easy to get here, so she's campaigned here a lot.
How do we know? We're seeing candidates, some invest more heavily in New Hampshire than in Iowa or South Carolina. Caitlin, what goes into the calculus of determining how much effort and money you pour into a state like that?
Right. Well, since Iowa goes first, you're seeing a lot of candidates stay in that state, campaign, build out organizations, but New Hampshire is the first to actually have a primary. It has been kind of fickle in the past. Remember, Bernie Sanders won here in 2016. Bill Clinton did not actually win the primary the first time around, but he came in second and saw that as kind of a way for him to come back. He called himself the comeback kid after his showing here in New Hampshire. Pat Buchanan also defeated Bob Dole in the primary in 1996. So sometimes it picks unusual candidates. Other times it can kind of go with the establishment. So we're watching to see whether voters here, as we talk to them throughout the weekend, whether they want to pick a candidate who can defeat Donald Trump or whether they're kind of rallying around a candidate that they're passionate about. I can say that all of these candidates will be courting those important activists, state and local lawmakers at the convention tomorrow. It'll be a big crowd.
All right. We look forward to more of your reporting. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks for joining us, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Well, crews are struggling to contain a fast-moving fire threatening hundreds of homes in Southern California. The fire started Wednesday in the La Cresta, California area. Hundreds of people in the area have been forced to evacuate. Nearly 2,000 acres have been scorched. Carter Evans is on the ground with the latest.
Crews raced to beat back flames that reached the fence of this Southern California home, one of hundreds threatened when heavy winds kicked up the Tanaja fire Thursday afternoon.
All of a sudden, it just started taking off.
Some 800 firefighters facing 90-degree temperatures attacked the fire with bulldozers on the ground and water-dropping helicopters from above.
We did have a full strike team of resources deployed, so we had firefighters on the backyards with hoses, and they were protecting those structures.
Some people also hosed down their own homes in an effort to keep them safe, and crews cleared out material that might quickly catch fire, tossing pillows and cushions into the pool. Police officers and firefighters patrolled neighborhoods, warning families it was time to go.
They don't know which way it's going to go, so they just recommend that we get out of here as quick as possible.
2 homes were damaged. Firefighters worked quickly to extinguish the flames on this house before they spread. Officials say it's still a dangerous situation.
This is a rapidly evolving incident, so we are asking people to stay out of the area.
The hillsides here haven't burned in 20 years. That left a lot of fuel for the fire. They're making some progress, but it's not clear when they're going to allow people to return to their homes. Schools are going to remain closed today because of poor air quality. Carter Evans, CBS News, Murrieta, California.
Well, the latest arrest warrant in the case of a missing Connecticut mom is revealing more about the case. Yesterday, Michelle Traconis was charged with evidence tampering for a second time. The day before, her boyfriend and estranged husband of the missing mom, Fatoulis Doulos, was charged with the same crime. Both have been implicated in the disappearance of Jennifer Doulos. CBS This Morning Saturday co-host Michelle Miller has a story.
Michelle Traconis said nothing Thursday as she left the Connecticut State Police barracks on bond. She had turned herself in on charges in connection with the disappearance of Connecticut mom Jennifer Doulos. Andrew Bowman is her attorney.
Remember that Michelle is presumed innocent, and she should be.
One day earlier, Fotis Doulos was also arrested for a second time and charged with evidence tampering. Later released on $500,000 bond.
It's an exhausting fight. I love my children. That's about it.
Both Doulos and Traconis previously pleaded not guilty on charges of tampering with evidence and hindering the prosecution. Neither have been charged with murder. But investigators believe the vanished mother of 5 was murdered on May 24th. In a new 38-page arrest warrant, police say they found Jennifer's DNA on the seats of a work truck Doulos had been driving. According to the warrant, police asked Traconis why Doulos would wash the truck after Jennifer disappeared. She told them, well, obviously all the evidence says because you showed me the picture of the blood in the door. It's because the body of Jennifer at some point was in there. CBS News analyst Ricky Kleeman.
Both of them should be worried because at some point there is always that possibility that the police could decide that they want to go all the way even without a body and bring a murder charge.
In June, we sat down with Doulos' attorney Norm Pattis, who told us the case against his client was built on speculation and hysteria.
Jennifer is an extremely sympathetic person right now. The nation has rallied behind her because she's a missing mom of 5 beautiful children. That doesn't mean my client's the villain.
Well, ahead on Cbsn, Zimbabwe's former president Robert Mugabe has died. Ahead, we take a look at his rise to power and the controversial legacy he left behind. Plus, a massive rescue and relief effort is underway in the Bahamas as officials warn the death toll from Hurricane Dorian could rise significantly. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN. Opposition parties in the UK say that they won't support the Prime Minister's call for an early election until he secures a delay to Britain's exit from the European Union. Boris Johnson insists the UK must leave by October 31st and says an election is the only way to break the deadlock, but he needs the support of 2/3 of lawmakers to trigger a snap election. BBC correspondent Chris Mason has a story.
Trying to strike a deal is rarely easy.
£50 per fish. Good God, that's an expensive fish.
If this looks like a Prime Minister on the campaign trail, that's because it is.
Hi, good morning.
Boris Johnson started the day in Peterhead in Aberdeenshire, talking fish and talking to farmers and encountering this brood. The thing is, his campaigning has photo opportunities, but there's no election date sorted because his opponents are saying, not yet.
There's a contest going on to make sure that we come out of the EU on October the 31st, and there are people in Parliament who plainly want to block that, and that includes Jeremy Corbyn, the SNP. I think they're wrong. I think the people of this country want us to get on and do it.
Back here at Westminster this morning, opposition party leaders got together in person and on the phone to plot a way of leaving Boris Johnson in a spot, and a tight one, forcing him to choose between breaking his promise of delivering Brexit come what may by the end of October, or breaking the soon-to-be law preventing a no-deal Brexit in just a matter of weeks.
Well, what we've agreed is that there are no circumstances in which we are going to give the Prime Minister the general election he is so desperate for. until an extension has been secured and until the risk of no deal has been completely eliminated. And I think we've done that.
The Prime Minister is on the run. Boris is broken. We have an opportunity to bring down Boris, to break Boris, and to bring down Brexit, and we must take that.
We will choose the timing of that election. Look, it's in our interest in the SNP to have that election tomorrow, but there's a broader interest that we have for all our nations in the United Kingdom of acting together. We will have that election when the time is right, but I'll make you this promise, you're not going to have a long wait.
The resignation of the Prime Minister's brother yesterday left him winded, and this place has left him wounded this week. The opposition parties working together now have a majority here, and they're intent on making use of it.